Hello to everyone. My name is Lacanilao Guevarra from BSIT-1C. This is my report for the topic of GE-02. Thank you. Submitted by Name, Mart Joseph Lacanilao Guevarra. Section, BSIT-1C. Submitted to Sir Romarc Bermudez, Coronel. Subject, GE-02. Jones Law, Philippines. The Jones Law of 1916, August 29, 1916, Public Number 240. An act to declare the purpose of the people of the United States as to the future political status of the people of the Philippine Islands, and to provide a more autonomous government for those islands. Preamble. Whereas it was never the intention of the people of the United States in the incipiency of the war with Spain to make it a war of conquest or for territorial aggrandizement, and whereas it is as it has always been the purpose of the people of the United States to withdraw their sovereignty over Philippine Island and to recognize their independence as soon as a stable government can be established therein, and whereas for the speedy accomplishment of such purpose it is desirable to place in the hands of the people of the Philippines as large a control of their domestic affairs as can be given them without in the meantime impairing the exercise of the rights of sovereignty by the people of the United States, in order that by the use and exercise of popular franchise and governmental powers, they may be the better prepared to fully assume the responsibilities and enjoy all the privileges of complete independence. Therefore, the Jones Law, also known as the Jones Act, the Philippine Autonomy Act, and the Act of Congress of August 29, 1916, was an organic act passed by the United States Congress. The law replaced the Philippine Organic Act of 1902 and acted as a constitution of the Philippines from its enactment until 1934, when the Tidings-McDuffie Act was passed, which in turn led eventually to the Commonwealth of the Philippines and to independence from the United States. The Jones Law created the first fully elected Philippine legislature. The law was enacted by the 64th United States Congress on August 29, 1916, and contained the first formal and official declaration of the United States federal government's commitment to grant independence of the Philippines. It was a framework for a more autonomous government with certain privileges reserved to the United States to protect its sovereign rights and interests in preparation for the grant of independence by the United States. The law provides that the grant of independence could come only as soon as a stable government can be established which was to be determined by the United States government itself. The law also changed the Philippine legislature into the Philippines' first fully elected body, and therefore made it more autonomous of the U.S. government. The 1902 Philippine Organic Act provide for an elected lower house, the Philippine Assembly, while the upper house, the Philippine Commission, was appointed. The Jones Law provided for the both houses to be elected and changed the name of the Assembly to the House Representative. The executive branch continued to be headed by an appointed Governor General of the Philippines, always an American. Elections were held on October 3, 1916, to the newly created Philippine Senate. Elections to the Philippine Assembly had already been held on June 6, 1916, and those elected in the elections were made members of the House Representative by the law. Jones Law, long title, an act to declare the purpose of the people of the United States as to the future political status of the people of the Philippine Islands, and to provide a more autonomous government for those islands, enacted by the 64th United States Congress. Citation: Public Law 64-240, Status at Large 39, Stats 545, Legislative History, signed into law by President Woodrow Wilson on August 29, 1916. Congressman William Jones authored the bill which replaced the Philippine Organic Act of 1902, a poster advertising the passage of the Jones Law. Joint sessions of the Philippine legislature created by the Jones Law in Manila on November 15, 1916. Development of the bill. The ultimate goal for the Philippines was independence. U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt said as early as 1901, we hope to do for them what has never been done for any people of their tropics, to make them first for self-government after the fashion of the really free nations. The American public tended to view America's presence in the Philippines as unremunerative and expensive, so Roosevelt had concluded by 1907, we shall have to be prepared for giving the islands independence of a more or less complete type much sooner than I think advisable. Woodrow Wilson said during the 1912 election campaign, which made him U.S. President, the Philippines are at present our frontier, but I hope we presently are to deprive ourselves of that frontier even before the 1912 elections. U.S. House Committee on Insular Affairs Chairman William Atkinson Jones attempted to launch a bill which set a fixed date for Philippine independence. Manuel L. Quezon was one of the Philippines' two residence commissioners to the U.S. House of Representatives. Jones delayed launching his bill, so Quezon drafted the first of two Jones bills. He drafted a second Jones bill in early 1914 after the election of Wilson as president and his appointment of Francis Burton Harrison as president of the Philippine Commission and Governor General of the Philippines. Wilson had informed Quezon of his hostility to any fixed timetable for independence, and Quezon believed that the draft bill contained enough flexibility to suit Wilson. Commonwealth of the Philippines. The Commonwealth of the Philippines. The Commonwealth of the Philippines administered the Philippines from 1935 until 1946. Aside from a period of exile in 1942 to 1945, when Japan occupied the country, it replaced the insular government, a U.S. territorial government, and was established by the Tyndall-McDuffie Act. The Commonwealth was designed as transitional administration, and it prepared the country for independence. During its more than a decade of existence, the Commonwealth had a strong executive and a Supreme Court. Its legislature, dominated by the Nacionalista Party, was at first an unicameral but later bicameral. In 1937, the government selected Tagalog, the language of Manila, and its surrounding provinces, as the basis of the national language, although it would be many years before its usage became general. Women's suffrage was adopted and the economy recovered to its pre-depression level before the Japanese occupation in 1942. The Commonwealth government went into exile from 1942 to 1945. When the Philippines was under Japanese occupation in 1946, the Commonwealth ended and the Philippines became an independent republic as provided for in Article 18 of the 1935 Constitution. The Commonwealth of the Philippines was also known as the Philippine Commonwealth or simply as the Commonwealth. It had official names in Tagalog language: Commonwealth ng Pilipinas, Pilipinas, and Spanish, Mancomunidad de Filipinas. History of the Philippines, 1898 to 1946, and History of the Philippines, Commonwealth. Philippine Constitutional Convention election, 1934. The pre-1935 U.S. Territorial Administration or Insular Government was headed by a Governor General who was appointed by the President of the United States. In December 1932, the U.S. Congress passed the Waves-Cathy Act with the premise of granting Filipinos independence. Provisions of the bill included reserving several military in naval bases for the United States, as well as imposing tariffs and quotas on Philippine exports. When it reached him for possible signature, President Herbert Hoover voted the house cutting act, but the American Congress overrode Hoover's veto in 1933. The bill over Hoover's objections. The bill, however, was opposed by the then Philippine Senate President Manuel L. Quezon and was also rejected by the Philippine Senate. This led to the creation and passing of a new bill known as Tidings-McDuffie Act or Philippine Independence Act, which allowed the establishment of the Commonwealth of the Philippines with a 10 years period of peaceful transitions to full independence, the date of which was to be on the 4th July following the 10th anniversary of the establishment of the Commonwealth. A constitutional convention was convened in Manila on July 30, 1934. On February 8, 1935, the 1935 Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines was approved by the convention by a vote of 177 to 1. The Constitution was approved by President Franklin D. Roosevelt on March 23, 1935 and ratified by popular vote on May 14, 1935. On 17 September 1935, presidential elections were held. Candidates included former President Emilio Aguinaldo, the Iglesia Filipina, Independiente leader Gregorio Aglipay, and others. Manuel L. Quezon and Sergio Osmeña of the Nacionalista Party were proclaimed the winners, winning the seat of President and Vice President respectively. The Commonwealth government was inaugurated on the morning of November 15, 1935. In ceremonies held on the steps of the legislative buildings in Manila, the event was attended by a crowd of around 300,000 people. Commonwealth of the Philippines. The Commonwealth of the Philippines, Spanish, Commonwealth de Pilipinas, Tagalog, Commonwealth ng Pilipinas or Malasariling Pamahalaan ng Pilipinas, was the administrative body that governed the Philippines from 1935 to 1946. Aside from a period of exile in the Second World War from 1942 to 1945 when Japan occupied the country, it replaced the insular government, a United States territorial government, and was established by the Tidings-McDuffie Act. The Commonwealth was designed as a transitional administration in preparation for the country. Full achievement of independence, its foreign affairs remained managed by the United States during its more than a decades of existence. The Commonwealth had a strong executive and a Supreme Court. In legislative dominated by the Nacionalista Party was at first unicameral but later bicameral. In 1937, the government selected Tagalog the language of of Manila and its surrounding provinces as the basis of national language, although it would be many years before its usage became general. Women's suffrage was adopted and the economy recovered to its pre-depression level before the Japanese occupation in 1942. The Commonwealth government went into exile from 1942 to 1945 when the Philippines was under Japanese occupation. In 1946, the Commonwealth ended. The Philippines claimed full sovereignty as provided for in Article 18 of the 1935 Constitution. The 1986 Freedom Constitution, promulgated by Presidential Proclamation, March 25, 1986. Proclamation number 3 is that 1986, signed on March 25, 1986. Malacanang, Manila, by the President of the Philippines. Proclamation number 3, declaring a national policy to implement reforms mandated by the people, protecting their basic rights, adopting a provisional constitution, and providing for an orderly transition to a government under a new constitution. Whereas the new government was installed through a direct exercise of the power of the Filipinos, people assisted by units of the new armed forces of the Philippines. Whereas the heroic action of the people was done in defiance of the provisions of the 1973 Constitution as amended. Whereas the direct mandate of the people as manifested by their extraordinary action demands the complete reorganizations of the government, restoration of democracy, protection of the basic rights, rebuilding of confidence in the entire government system, eradications of graft and corruption, restoration of peace and order, maintenance of the supremacy of civilian authority over the military, and the transition to government under a new constitution in the shortest time possible. Whereas during the period of transition to a new constitution, it must be guaranteed that the government will respect basic human rights and fundamental freedoms. Wherefore, I, Corazon C. Aquino, President of the Philippines, by virtue of the power vested in me by the sovereign mandate of the people, do hereby promulgate the following Constitution. Constitution of the Philippines. The Constitution of the Filipinos, Saligang Batas ng Pilipinas or Constitution ng Pilipinas, Spanish, Constitution de la República de Filipinas. In the Constitutions of Supreme Law of the Republic of the Philippines, its final draft was completed by the Constitutional Commissions on October 12, 1986 and was ratified by a nationwide plebiscite on February 2, 1987. Three other constitutions have effectively governed the country in its history: the 1935 Commonwealth Constitution, the 1973 Constitution, and the 1986 Freedom Constitution. The earliest constitution establishing a Philippine Republic, the 1899 Malolos Constitution, was never fully implemented throughout the Philippines and did not establish a state that was internationally recognized due in a great part to the eruption of the Philippine-American War following its adoption. The 1899 Malolos Constitution. The Malolos Constitution, we the representatives of the Filipino people, legally convened the established justice, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and ensure the blessing of liberty, imploring the aid of the sovereign lawgiver of the universe. In order to obtain these objectives, have voted, decreed, and approved the following. Political Constitution. Article 1. The political association of all Filipinos constitutes a nation whose state shall be named the Philippine Republic. Article 2. The Philippine Republic is free and independent. Article 3. Sovereignty resides exclusively in the people. Title 2. On the government. Article 4. The government of the Republic is a popular, representative, alternative, and responsible, and shall be divided among three distinct powers, which shall be named legislative, executive, and judicial. Never can two or more of these powers be given to a person or corporation, nor shall the power of legislative be vested in any single individual. Title 3 on religion. Title 4 on the Filipinos and their national and individual rights. Title 4 again on legislative power. Title 6 on the Permanent Commission. Title 7 on executive power. Title 8 on the President of the Republic. Title 9 on the Secretaries of Government. Title 10 on judicial power. Title 11 on provincial and popular assemblies. Title 12 on the administration of the Senate. Title 13 on constitutional reform. Title 9 on constitutional observance and oath of office and on languages. Transitory provision. The 1987 Constitution, the Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines. Preamble. With the sovereign Filipino people, imploring the aid of Almighty God in order to build a just and human society and establish a government that shall embody our ideas and aspirations, promote the common good, conserve and develop our patrimony, and secure to ourselves and our posterity the blessings of independence and democracy under the rule of the law, and regime that of truth, justice, freedom, love, equality, and peace do ordain and promulgate this Constitution. Article 3, National Territory. The national territory comprises the Philippine Archipelago, with all the islands and waters embraced therein, and all other territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty and jurisdiction, consisting of its terrestrial, fluvial, and aerial domains, including its territorial sea, the seabed, the subsoil, the insular shelves, and others submarine areas, the waters around between and connecting the islands of the archipelago regardless of their breadth and dimensions, form part of the internal waters of the Philippines. Philippine Constitutional Commission of 1986, ruling by decree during the early months of her tenure as a president, installed by the People Power Revolution President Corazon Aquino, was granted 3 options: restored the 1935 Constitution, retain and make reforms to the 1973 Constitution, or pass a new Constitution. She decided to draft a new Constitution and issue Proclaim number 3, March 25, 1986, abrogating many of the provision of the 1973 Constitution adopted during the Marcos regime, including the unicameral legislature, the Batasang Pambansa, the Office of Prime Minister, and provisions which gave the President legislative powers, obtained, called the Freedom Constitution. This Constitution was intended as a transitional constitution to ensure democracy and the freedom of the people. The Freedom Constitution provided for an orderly transfer of power while a constitutional commission was drafting a permanent constitution. The Constitutional Commission was composed of 48 members appointed by Aquino from varied backgrounds, including several former members of the House of Representatives, former justice of the Supreme Court, a Roman Catholic bishop, and political activists against the Marcos regime. The Commission elected Cecilia Muñoz Palma, a former Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, as its president. Several issues were of particular contention during the Commission session, including the form of government, to adopt the abolition of the death penalty, the retention of U.S. bases in Clark and Subic, and the integration of economic policies into the Constitution. Lino Broca, a film director and political activist who was a member of the Commission, walked out before the Constitution completion, and 2 other delegates dissented from the final draft. The Commission finished the final draft on October 12, 1986, and presented it to Aquino on October 15. The Constitution was ratified by a nationwide plebiscite on February 8, 1987. The Constitution provided of 3 governmental branches, namely the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. The executive branches is headed by the President and his appointed cabinet members. The executive, same with the others 2 co-equal branches, has limited power. This is ensure that the country will be safeguarded. If martial law is to be declared, the President can still declare martial law, but it expires within 60 days, and Congress can either reject or extend it. The task of the Supreme Court is to review whether a declaration of martial law is just. The legislative power consists of the Senate and House representatives. There, there are 24 senators, and the House is composed of district representatives. It also created opportunities for underrepresented represented sectors of community to select their representative through party list system. The judiciary branch comprises the Supreme Court and the lower courts. The Supreme Court is granted the power of to hear any cases that deals with the constitutionality of law, about a treaty or decree of the government. It is also tasked to administrate the function of the lower courts. Through the Constitution, 3 independent constitution commissions, namely the Civil Service Commission, Commission on Elections, and Commission on Audit, were created. Their constitutional commissions have different functions. The Constitution also paved a way for establishment of the office of the ombudsman, which has a function of promoting and ensuring an ethical and lawful conduct of the government. The amended 1973 Constitution. The 1973 Constitution, as amended in October 16, 1976, on January 30, 1980, and April 7, 1981, Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines, Preamble. We, the sovereign people, imploring the aid of divine providence in order to establish a government that shall embody our ideals, promote the general welfare, conserve and develop the patrimony of our nation, and secure to ourselves and our posterity the blessing of democracy under a regime of justice, peace, liberty, and equality, to ordain and promulgate this Constitution. Constitution of the Philippines, 1973. The Constitution of the Philippines, the Constitution of the Philippines, Saligang Batas ng Pilipinas in Filipino, in the Supreme Law of the Philippines, the 1973 Constitution, composed of a preamble and 17 articles, provides for the shift from presidential to parliamentary system of government. The Constitution vests the legislative power in the National Assembly. A Prime Minister is elected from among the members of the National Assembly and serves as the head of government and Commander-in-Chief of the Philippine Armed Forces. A President is elected from among the members of the National Assembly and serves as the symbolic head of the state with a 6-year term. The judicial power is vested in the Supreme Court, composed of a Chief Justice and 14 justices. The National Assembly exercises the power to define, prescribe, and apportion the jurisdiction of the lower courts. All justices of the Supreme Court and judges of the lower courts are appointed by the Prime Minister. Puppet Government Constitution. Puppet States. A puppet states, puppet regime or puppet government is a state that is de jure independent but de facto completely dependent upon an outside power and subject to its order. Puppet states have nominal sovereignty but a foreign power effectively exercises control through means such as a financial interest, economic or military support. Puppet states. Puppet states are distinguished puppet state are distinguished from allies which choose their action on their own in accordance with treaties they voluntarily entered. Puppet states are forced into providing legal endorsement for action already taken by a foreign power. A puppet state reserves the external paraphernalia of independence such as a name, flag, anthem, constitution, law codes, motto, and government, but in reality, it is an organ of another state which created, sponsor, or otherwise controls the government of the puppet state. The puppet government, international law, does not recognize occupied puppet state as legitimate. Puppet states can is to be puppet through the military defeat to the master state, as in Europe and Asia. In 1945, absorption into the master state, as in the early Soviet Union, or achievement of independence through state building methods, especially through decolonization. The term is a metaphor which compares a state or government to a puppet controlled by a puppeteer using strings. The first recorded use of the term puppet government in from 1884 in reference to the Khediviate of Egypt, in a country from a king to noblemen of lower rank. Since the Peace of Westphalia of 1648, the concept of a nation came into existence, where sovereignty was connected more to the people who inhabited the land than to the nobility who owned the land. A similar concept mainly associated with pre-19th century political history is sovereignty, the control of the external affairs of the one state by another. Philippine Organic Act 1902. The Philippine Organic Act C. 1369 with 32 stat. 691 was a basic law for the insular government that was enacted by the United States Congress on July 1 with 1902. That it is also known as the Philippine Bill of 1902 and the Copper Act. After its author Henry A. Cooper, the approval of the act coincident with the official end of the Philippine-American War. Insular government of the Philippines Island. The insular government of the Philippines Island was an unincorporated territory of the United States that was established in 1901 and was dissolved in 1935. The insular government was preceded by the United States military government of the Philippine Island and was followed by the Commonwealth of the Philippines. United States Congress. The United States Congress or U.S. Congress in the bicameral legislature of the federal government of the United States and consists of House Representatives and the Senate. The Congress meets the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. Both senators and representatives are chosen through direct elections. Through box vacancies in the Senate may be filled by a governor's appointment. Congress has 535 voting members, 100 senators, and 435 representatives. The Vice President of the United States has a vote in the Senate. Only when senators are evenly divided, the House of Representatives has a 6 non-voting members. Henry Allen Cooper. Henry Allen Cooper, September 8, 1850, March 1, 1931, was a U.S. representative from Wisconsin. Philippine-American War. The Philippine-American War also refers to as the Filipino-American War. The Philippine War and previously referred to as the Philippine Insurrection of the Tagalog Insurgency. Pilipino, digmaang Pilipino-Amerikano. Spanish, Guerra, Filipino, Estadounidense, was an armed conflict between the First Philippine Republic and the United States that lasted from February 4, 1899 to July 2, 1902, while Filipino nationalists view the conflict as a continuation of the struggle for independence that began in 1896 with the Philippine Revolution. The U.S. government regarded it as an insurrection. The conflict arose when the First Philippine Republic objected to the term of the Treaty of Paris under which the United States took possession of the Philippines from Spain, ending the Spanish-American War. And that's all. Thanks for watching.